Hello, and welcome to Monologues, the show where I talk. My name is Kastor Köhler, and today I'll be talking about communication on the internet. A quick disclaimer here, straight in the beginning, that these are my personal thoughts on the subject. I don't do any specific research beforehand, but rather these are the thoughts that are in my head, the inner monologue going on in my head, but spoken out loud. If you want to correct me on some factual mistakes that I've done, please send me a DM on Instagram at Outer Monologues Podcast or an email at the address outermonologuespodcast@gmail.com. Now, on to the subject. Just to preface this a bit, again another preface here, but this is not a communication guide on how to communicate on the internet. So no like business talk around here, but these are just my thoughts on how we communicate, how private people, how you and I, normal people, how we communicate on the internet, and how kind of this affects the world and the way we live and our society in general. Just and maybe the most interesting part to keep in mind during all of this, and this is maybe the thing on the bottom of why I want to talk about this is the fact that does this like internet communication that we have, does it affect how we communicate in real life with each other, like face to face with other people, the normal way of communicating? But just keep this question in mind. I won't have any further intro per se on this. Just gonna go straight into the subject. So when most people think about communication on the internet, I think most people think about communicating with strangers, and often then in text form, to be more specific. So you kind of don't jump to the other ways of communicating on the internet, but you think of often, I think, social media, where you talk to strangers or people you know somewhat or more or less, but you talk to them over in text form. And there are a lot of things that are peculiar about this way of communicating, because it isn't actually natural in any way, if you think about it. You kind of write a message to someone, and then they read it and they react in the way they do, and then they kind of send another text to you, and this chain goes on, and that's not really normal in any way. And there are so many factors that change how this affects our communication. So especially if you take the example of like talking in text form, this will maybe affect our way of messaging and our way of getting our message out there, just in the way of us being often a lot more straightforward in our communication. So I think a lot of people think that when you think about people talking on the internet, especially on forums and stuff, people are very rude, and I think this is, in a way, it's kind of a misunderstanding of what it actually entails, but it is often true as well, because when we write in text form, we want to be brief, because no one wants to basically have a text, for example, on their Facebook or something, or on their Facebook post. You don't want to have a comment there that is like an entire page long, an essay that you have to read through, if it's nothing like actually an enticing story that you want to read through. But those are very specific reasons why that would be a good idea. But you kind of want to be brief, and you want to get straight to the point, which means you dump out all of the unnecessary parts of the story or your message, and you don't try to sugarcoat it. So you don't, when you speak with people, you kind of pad your sentences and your way of phrasing things with a lot of nice sugarcoating and trying to not say anything incredibly straight ahead. But you you want to go a bit around the subject and loop around, but still get to the point at some point, if you get what I mean. So that was kind of an example of it. But in text, this doesn't really work, and it's if you read a text that is formulated in that way, it kind of reads like someone, you kind of get annoyed because they don't get to the point, basically. But another factor in communication on the internet that I think is often brought up about why people are rude and why people act so different on the internet is anonymity. So that's where we get into the first chapter. So, chapter 1, anonymity. I think this is probably the factor that is most often gets the blame for why people act so differently and why people are jerks on the internet. I think most of the forms of communication on the internet is anonymized in some way. If you really think about it, there's always some sort of layer, because you rarely don't have any like direct contact with anyone. And in my mind, or what I came up with now, is kind of this anonymity kind of falls into 3 different groups. I like groups, as you can maybe notice in the previous episodes. So these are my 3 groups of internet anonymity. So I will start with the 2 most extreme ones. So of course, the first one would be complete anonymity. What I mean by this is maybe some forums like, if you know, 4chan or 8chan even, or even more maybe simplified, is guest accounts on different platforms. So I think a lot of news platforms maybe have that. They have their comment section, but you don't have to have an account and then be under a username, but you can write anonymously there. Or usually maybe you have to create an account, but then you can actually post anonymously even though you're logged in. So this is kind of what I mean by complete anonymity, that anyone reading the site can't know at all who you are. And that's a very, very interesting relationship between the one that is being spoken to, or the audience basically of your message, and you, the message conveyor. Because they don't know who to respond to, actually. They don't know anything about your story. They don't know who you are, maybe from which part of the world you are, what, I don't know, cultural heritage you have. They don't know anything. So, but this also, it affects the way you speak to them in such a large way, because you can disregard all thoughts and consequences about what happens to you then, because they can't really, if you talk to a friend in real life or something, if you say something stupid or something incredibly rude, you're gonna either get smacked in the face, or I don't know, lose that friend, or maybe even worse. But there will be direct consequences. But when you write completely anonymously, then there are no consequences for you, because no one can know who you are, and you kind of just put out that message into the world, and then you kind of just leave it there, and then it exists in the internet. And this leads, I think, to a lot of people. You might think that this kind of leads to people speaking their absolute truths or their absolute opinions, because what do you have to hide? You can write exactly what you think, and I think in a way that is true also. That is true, but I often kind of think of this as it usually also maybe exaggerates, and you want to go a bit overboard with your opinion. So if you're of a different opinion than the one you're talking to, and you write maybe on a forum or something about a certain question, then you have a debate there, and you kind of want to win the other person. Then if you're absolutely anonymous, then you kind of easily fall into the trap of over exaggerating your position or your opinions, because you want to have a stronger argument, and it gives a lot of more impact than saying something like I hate all these people and this idea is completely idiotic, than saying, well, I don't kind of, like this opinion, but it isn't the worst and it has some merits, but I think the cons like overweigh it a lot. And this kind of messaging on the internet or via text in general, it doesn't have any oomph behind it. It doesn't convey a strong message. So you will probably, let's say, lose that debate because you don't have a strong position. So you might just enhance your position even more and move further towards the extreme just to kind of have a better position in the conversation. And just this complete anonymity, in my opinion, is kind of I would form it maybe as a useless form of communication. This might seem a bit extreme when you think of it at first. Of course, there is the inherent value of just talking with people, and even if someone is completely lying about their just thoughts and opinions, then it's still you kind of get them into your head, and you have to think about them, and you need to evaluate them and so forth. But it doesn't really. It's still two just ghosts talking to each other, because neither of the people kind of know who they are talking to, and it's very difficult to convince someone to the other side or have any sort of really, I think, a meaningful debate when no one knows who they are, and you can't really relate to anyone in any way other than what they're writing. So that's what I have to say about complete anonymity. Let's go over to the second group, namely no anonymity, and this is kind of a very rare thing on the internet, I think. It has become a lot more prevalent in the last year, though, because my main maybe example of this is video meetings and Zoom calls, and I guess in a way, this also is videos that people put up on the internet. That is like asynchronous. But in general, in the most extreme case, I would only recognize or put something into this group if it contains maybe the real name of the person, and it is spoken, so it's not in text form either. And then also the fact that a camera should be involved. And the camera part is kind of, it narrows down the group into a very small amount of forms of communication. But it is very important, because no anonymity kind of holds in itself also the fact that you know who the person is who is talking to you, and maybe in a lot of cases also you know who you are talking to. So not only who's talking at you, but who you are talking to. And it's you kind of know, you can see their reactions and how they talk, and that's where I think the camera is kind of an important part. Not only, it's not maybe about the anonymity and seeing the other person's face or whatever, but the fact that you get the body language of the person into that communication as well, and that's kind of gives an entirely new aspect to the communication. And usually I would put this group into just having direct communication, but you might argue also that recorded videos fall into this. Because, for example, I think this podcast, which is now on YouTube if you're listening to someone else, so if you prefer to listen to it there, do that. So maybe this podcast is kind of falls under the same banner, because you can see me talking and you hear me talking and you know who I am. I say my name out loud in the beginning and the end. So this is kind of a good example of I have no anonymity here. You can find out who I am probably by a couple of YouTube or Google searches on my name. and see what I do and where I'm from and what kinds of things I liked back in 2005 when I created my Facebook account, which was probably earlier, but something along those lines. But okay, so the main point with the no anonymity group is that it mimics real life conversations and real life communications very accurately, as accurately as you can maybe do on the internet, because you get most of the aspects that go into the communication, and of course you lose some things and you get some problems and jankiness from just being a digital form of communication. For example, I think a problem in a lot of like Zoom meetings and voice meetings in general is just it's impossible to talk over other people and hear both voices. So it becomes a very, okay, one person talks and then another person talks, and then it's kind of a turn-based meeting, if you get what I mean. So onwards to the final group, and this is maybe the broadest group and the most common group of communication on the internet when it comes to anonymity. And this is like semi-anonymity, or I call it also pseudo-anonymity, because in a lot of cases here, you get the picture of the communication being anonymous or being honest, and you can connect it to a person, but there's still a very large wall of anonymity there, and anonymity to a large degree there. This is, for example, social media posting. So someone posting on Facebook, on your wall or anything, and different internet forums where you maybe sometimes, I guess in general in this group, it's sometimes you're under your real name. So this would be, for example, on Facebook, you are under your real name, or that's the pretense at least. There are fake profiles, and sometimes you're under a fake name or a username or some sort of block that doesn't connect it to the real person, like very straight. But you might think that if you're using your real name, for example, on Facebook, let's take that as an example. If someone writes a rude comment to you on Facebook, and you can see who the person is, you can see that it's John Smith that wrote to you and said that your opinion is shit and you should go die in hell. You might think that, oh fuck, John Smith is a terrible person, he can go to hell as well. And you might think that you're actually directing that to John Smith, but you never know. There's always the degree of anonymity, because, well, first and foremost, it's the internet, so fake profiles and catfishing and all of that exists. So even though it's under a real name, it might not be their real name. It might be a completely different person just having a fake profile. But also, if you think about just in general, even if you're connected to this real person, so you know that it's, you would know that it's their correct name and that it's actually them, and you can see some facts about them, but you don't really get the entire person. You still get the basically the wall or the filter of having an online presence, and they control what they have on Facebook for themselves. So they kind of put out there what they want you to see, but there might be a lot of things that basically tell a lot about them and about their lives and who they are that they don't put out on the internet. So that's maybe the most like obvious thing that is like the semi-anonymity, even if it seems like it is completely the real person and there isn't any anonymity, there always is. And this becomes even more clear, of course, when you work under usernames or whatever, because then you're not even having your real name there, but you have more anonymity. And this is kind of the biggest groups. Of course, this is a very, very large scale, a very huge area, and this is maybe just some thoughts on what I think is worth bringing up here, I guess. And I don't really have anything more to say about anonymity. Maybe you can hit me up with some comments and I can think about them. Get back to you in the next episode. So I want to go into the next chapter then. Okay, so far I talked about talking with people that you know, or that you don't know. I mean, strangers. You're talking to strangers in general on the internet, but now I want to talk about talking with people you know, and just to make this a lot easier without having to repeat a lot of words and use a lot of extra words, I will call all of the people you know your friends. They can be your colleagues, someone you met one time and you kind of know them. It might be your family, might be your actual friends, or good or bad, anything. But I will put them all under the word friend for now. So when you talk to your friends, it's kind of interesting because when you talk to them on the internet, the entire factor of anonymity is kind of dropped. Even if you don't meet them any time after that in real life, they know who you are, and they can connect the things you say and the things you tell them or tell someone else that they just see on the internet. They know that it's you talking, and they know who you are. So the anonymity is dropped. But what is instead, but also is that the consequences are a lot higher, because as they know who you are, then you can be held accountable for what you've said on the internet. And that's not anything that is usually a part of communicating on the internet. If you're talking to strangers, no one will trace that down to you and say that, oh shit, you're a bad person. No, they will just let it that, oh, this random person from somewhere in the world thought that my opinion was wrong, but I think I'm right. So what does this mean for the communication, or the factors in the communication? I think it's kind of, it brings it a lot closer to real life communication in general, because there are simply a lot of the different aspects we talked about earlier, especially anonymity, is dropped completely, and that's a huge part of why communication is different on the internet. So I think now the biggest factor that changes the communication is the medium in which you're having that. And here now in this episode, I will only talk about talking in text with your friends, because if we go into the factors of voice communication, or like meeting communication, so with camera and voice, or camera and text, there will be so many factors, and I think a lot of people kind of, it isn't that interesting, because especially like with camera, not a lot of things change, as I talked about earlier in this episode. So we will talk about text. And here I also again have I have 3 different problems with talking in text, or 3, maybe not problems, but factors that change how we communicate. And the first one here is that you're able to read the communication multiple times. So this is, it's not a one and done thing. So when you talk to someone in real life, you basically say some words and they hear them, and then if they need to basically hear them again, they need to recall from memory just what you said. But this entire process is kind of dropped with messages, because you write the message and they see it and they can read it on their phone, and if they don't remember what you said exactly, or kind of want to think about it some more, they can just read the text again. And that changes a huge amount of things, because you can read so much into something that the like levels of thought put into a message can be so varying. For example, the person reading it, the person receiving the message, can put a huge amount of time into reading text and basically trying to solve from that in what kind of a mood the other person is, and what that person thinks of me, and all of these kinds of things, while the other person might have been super stressed or just about to get off the bus or train at their stop and just needed to write the text quickly and didn't really think of how they phrased the message that they wanted to send. So the basically the level of sophistication in the message can be so different, and the effort put into it, and it's just a huge thing. And I think there's probably PhDs done on how text messaging is different from normal, like spoken language and spoken communication. Okay, so the second problem is that there are no body language and no intonations put into the message. So when you send a text message, you can't do these like bodily movements to show what you mean, but rather you have to actually be able to put them into text and somehow convey that maybe feeling with words. And I think the perfect example for this is how sarcasm is incredibly difficult to do over text. And I think everyone has experienced that at some point, that you're writing something sarcastically or receiving a message and you're not sure if that person is serious or if it's sarcasm. And I think that's kind of easy to see or hear or just figure out when you're talking to someone, face to face. But over text, that is very difficult. So on to the third problem, or the third factor, is that both parts can really think through their answers. And what I mean by thinking through their answers is when you're speaking to someone in real life, you kind of have to respond straight away. You can't take your time to think. For example, if you receive a text, then you can read the text, think about what you want to answer, put down your phone, and think about the answer you want to send or what you want to say back for 10 minutes. Then send back a text, and they'll do the same. But if you do that in real life, so someone says something to you and you stand there and maybe think for 10 minutes, they will think something is completely fucking wrong with you, because who does that? So this really changes a lot of things, and I don't know how it works or what it actually changes, but these are some factors that actually do change. But that's all I had actually, again, for the talking with people part, because so now we have covered both the speaking with strangers and speaking with friends part. So now let's go into a very final brief chapter. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is how this affects, how internet communication affects our real life communication. How does this affect our communication face to face when we speak to each other? And I kind of want to, for very naive people maybe, or I think this would be a naive thought to think that the internet is kind of a bubble, and what happens there stays there, and there are no basically results coming or any differences coming from the internet to the real life communication. But that's simply not the case. If you spend a large part of the day talking on the internet to someone and having that sort of culture, it will creep into the way you talk to people in real life as well. But this is a thing I can't really form a proper opinion on, or I've thought about this and I've kind of wanted to formulate what I think how it affects your real life communication, but it's very difficult. The only thing I really came up with that might be a symptom of this is that we've become more straightforward with our communication and maybe more blunt in general when we talk. But this is a thing that varies so much from culture to culture. So it might just be that the culture around me, the people around me are changing the way that they're talking, but somewhere else it doesn't do that. And I think this is an incredibly fascinating thing to think about, and there's so many factors that you can bring up that, might this be a factor of internet communication? And probably, I think most of the answers are yes, to a part, but it might have a lot of different factors as well. But this is kind of a question I want to put to you then. Like, think about it. Has your communication, your ways of communicating with people when you speak to them, not when you text them, not when you call them, not when you, I don't know, take contact in any other way, send them a letter, I don't know, but when you actually speak to them face to face, has your way of communicating changed that isn't just like culture based, but rather a symptom of your internet presence and your internet communication? So I hope this sparked some thoughts for you, and I hope this does. And it's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just something that's interesting to think about, I think. And we'll end the episode here, actually. So as you maybe remember, I just want to say this again, that we talked about communication over the internet and how this affects our life. The music in today's episode was made by Nuori Hector and by Max Manberg. And I'm Castor Köhler, and I'm out.
I pay the price for living faster than I may. Lord have mercy on this wondrous day. Come on, lay down your head now and try to go to sleep, 'cause the sounds of tomorrow, they will turn up the heat. Hold up your head now and stay on your feet. You will feel better, won't you? Wash those sheets now. You've been living too hard for